When the office went silent and she turned the key in the lock, I knew this night wasn't about work anymore. The office had a different sound once everyone left. During the day, it hummed with the rhythm of phones, keyboards, and chatter spilling across desks. But at night, it grew hollow, every sound carrying farther, like the building itself was holding its breath. I was gathering papers into neat stacks, ready to head out, when the sharp click of the lock broke the silence. I turned, and there she was, my boss, still standing near the door. The key slid from her fingers to the pocket of her blazer, and then she looked at me. Not the clipped, efficient glance she gave in meetings, but something slower, deliberate. A faint smile touched her lips, the kind that carried more than one meaning if you stared too long. "Stay late," she said softly, almost like it was an invitation rather than an order. "I have plans you can't refuse." The words hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, though I wasn't sure why. She'd never spoken to me that way before, not sharp, not commanding, but warm, with a trace of playfulness curling through her tone. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe it was just another task, another late night she needed covered. But the way she lingered near the door told me it wasn't only about the work. She didn't rush back to her desk, didn't shuffle papers or pretend to check emails. Instead, she walked toward me slowly, the echo of her heels tapping a rhythm against the polished floor. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my voice. "Is there something urgent?" She tilted her head, her eyes holding mine. "You'll see." There was something disarming about her then. Usually she carried herself with an air of quiet authority, the kind that filled a room before she even spoke. Tonight that was still there, but softened, as if she'd placed part of it aside just for this moment. I became aware of everything, the faint trace of her perfume drifting toward me, the whisper of fabric as she slipped off her jacket and folded it neatly over a chair, the way the dim desk lamp cast gold along the edge of her cheekbone. My heart gave a quiet thud, like it was trying to catch up to something my mind hadn't fully named yet. The office, once ordinary, suddenly felt like the wrong setting for the tension that hung between us. Every detail seemed exaggerated, the hum of the air vent, the way shadows stretched long across the carpet, the closeness of four walls that now seemed to press in. I hadn't realized how alone we were until then. Just her and me. And in that stillness, I felt it, something unsaid, something deliberate, waiting between us. The shift in her presence was subtle, but I caught it. She didn't sit at her desk the way she usually did, upright, precise, with an air of distance that reminded everyone she was the boss. Tonight she moved differently. Slower. She slipped out of her blazer and placed it carefully across the back of her chair, as though setting aside the roles she wore all day. Her blouse softened her posture, and the low glow from the desk lamp painted her in warmer shades than the cold, bright office lights ever had. She looked less like the untouchable figure who commanded meetings and more like a woman carrying the weight of a long day. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, folding one leg over the other with a grace that felt rehearsed yet vulnerable all at once. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but quieter than I expected. "Do you ever notice," she began, eyes lowering briefly to the desk before meeting mine again, "how empty this place feels after hours?" I nodded, my throat dry. "It's different. Almost like it doesn't belong to us anymore." Her lips curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. Just recognition. "Exactly. During the day, it swallows us whole. Deadlines, decisions, meetings. And then at night." She let the sentence trail, her gaze drifting toward the window where the city lights glowed in the distance. "At night it reminds me how quiet my life has become." That admission caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing a boss usually shared, not the kind of thing you said to someone 10 years younger either. But she didn't seem to regret it. She leaned back, studying me, as if waiting to see whether I'd flinch or lean closer. I found myself leaning in. "You don't seem the type to get lonely." Her laugh was soft, but there was a crack in it, almost like she wanted to deflect and couldn't. "Everyone assumes that." She pressed a fingertip lightly against the edge of a file, tracing the paper without looking at it. confidence, authority, it fools people. But when the office empties, it's just me, the silence, and the echoes of things I don't always want to remember. The words stirred something in me. I'd always admired her, the certainty in her decisions, the calm control in her voice. But now I was seeing another layer, a quiet vulnerability, fragile but deliberate. She wasn't just my boss in this moment. She was a woman letting me glimpse the truths she rarely allowed anyone near. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that felt honest. I don't mind staying late if it means keeping you company. Her eyes flickered up to mine, and the pause that followed felt heavier than any silence I'd ever known. It wasn't awkward, it was charged, like the air right before a storm. That was when I realized she hadn't locked the door just to finish work. The files sat between us like an excuse neither of us needed, yet she reached for them anyway. Let's at least make it look like we're being productive, she said, her tone half serious, half playful. I pulled my chair a little closer so we could share the same stack of documents, but the space suddenly felt too small for the both of us. Our shoulders brushed lightly as I leaned over, and that tiny contact sent a ripple through me. She didn't shift away. If anything, I thought I felt her settle in a little more comfortably. We began sorting through pages, highlighting, correcting, scribbling notes, but I couldn't focus. Every accidental touch felt deliberate, every glance carried weight. When her hand reached for the pen resting near mine, our fingers grazed. The touch was fleeting, but it lingered in the air, an unspoken spark neither of us acknowledged out loud. I caught the faint scent of her perfume again, subtle and elegant, not overwhelming. It wrapped around me like a reminder that this was no ordinary night. The way her hair slipped forward when she leaned over, the quiet sigh she gave when she concentrated, it all pressed against my awareness, filling the room more than any conversation could. You missed a section here, she murmured, sliding the paper closer and circling a line with her pen. Her arm brushed against mine as she did it, and I froze, acutely aware of the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my sleeve. I managed a small laugh, though my chest was tight. Guess I'm distracted. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly, as if she knew exactly what I meant but wanted me to say it out loud. Instead, she just smiled faintly, her lips curving into something secretive. We kept working, but it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like choreography, her reaching, me following, our movements weaving into something unspoken. Every shared glance lasted a second too long. Every brush of her sleeve, every faint shift in her seat seemed deliberate, though maybe it was only my heart turning everything into meaning. After a while, I realized I was no longer hearing the shuffle of papers or the scratching of pens. I was hearing the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the quiet catch in it when our hands touched again, the faint tap of her heel against the floor like a pulse she couldn't quiet. The office was no longer hollow. It was alive with tension, warm, heavy, electric. I turned a page too quickly, and the corner brushed against her wrist. She didn't move her hand away. Instead, she let it stay there, just close enough that the back of her fingers rested against mine. My pulse stumbled, and when I finally looked at her, she was already watching me. That silent exchange said more than any words could. We weren't just working late anymore. We were circling something neither of us had dared to name. Her voice broke the silence first, low and almost hesitant. You know, she said, tracing the edge of a page with her fingertip. I don't usually let anyone stay this late with me. I glanced at her, surprised. Why not? She gave a quiet laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. Because I don't like people seeing me when I'm not in control. Her hand stilled, and for a moment she looked younger, not in years but in openness, as if she'd stepped out from behind the walls she kept so carefully built. I leaned back in my chair watching her. The woman who commanded every meeting, who spoke with confidence that could silence a room, was now admitting something fragile to me. And it felt like a gift, one she could just as easily take back. You don't always have to be in control, I said quietly. Her gaze lifted to mine, sharp at first, then softening. Easy for you to say. You're not the one everyone looks to. Every decision I make, every move, I have to prove myself. Even after all these years, people still test me. She shook her head slightly, a shadow crossing her expression. It gets exhausting. I wanted to reach for her hand then, but I didn't. Instead, I let my voice carry the weight of what I felt. I've never doubted you. Not once. That caught her off guard. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to reply but couldn't find the words. For a long breath, she just studied me, her eyes searching, measuring something in my face. Then she let out a quiet exhale, almost like surrender. You're different, she said finally. You see me when others only see the role I play. The truth of her words settled heavily between us. I realized then how much she must have carried alone, how rarely anyone gave her space to be vulnerable. And in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to shoulder even a fraction of it with her. I smiled faintly. Maybe I just pay attention. Her laugh this time was soft, genuine. But it faded quickly into silence again, and that silence grew charged, stretching thin like a wire ready to snap. Her eyes lingered on mine, holding me there, and the room seemed to narrow until it was only the two of us. No files, no deadlines, just the unspoken truth filling the space between our breaths. I could feel my heart racing, though I tried to keep my voice steady. If you're lonely here, I don't mind being the one you let stay. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned just slightly closer across the desk, her expression unreadable but her eyes unflinching. The pause was long, deliberate, and in it I felt everything she wasn't saying, the hesitation, the pull, the risk. And then, so softly I almost thought I imagined it, she whispered. That's what scares me. She leaned closer, sliding a document toward me, her perfume drifting with her movement. The words on the page blurred. All I could see was the way her hand came to rest lightly on my arm as she pointed out a detail. Her touch was gentle, barely there, yet it set something inside me off balance. My pulse quickened, echoing in my ears louder than the faint hum of the office lights. I didn't move. I couldn't. This section, she murmured, her voice lower now, almost intimate. We'll need to revise it carefully. I nodded, though I hadn't processed a single word. My focus was on the warmth of her fingers through the thin fabric of my shirt, the softness of her skin pressing ever so slightly against mine. It was such a small gesture, but it held a weight I couldn't ignore. When I finally glanced up, her face was close, closer than it had ever been. I could see the faint lines near her eyes, the kind that only appear when someone has lived enough to earn them. They didn't diminish her beauty. They deepened it. They made her real. Our eyes locked, and suddenly the air thickened between us. My voice dropped without me realizing. You trust me with this? Her lips curved into the smallest smile, one that seemed to carry both hesitation and certainty at the same time. I wouldn't keep you here if I didn't. For a moment neither of us moved. Her hand lingered on my arm, and my own fingers twitched with the urge to cover hers, to hold it in place so she wouldn't pull away. But I didn't. I stayed still, letting the tension build in the silence, letting the unspoken words hum between us. I could feel her breath, soft and steady, brushing across my skin as she leaned a little closer to point again at the document. This time her shoulder pressed lightly against mine, her warmth seeping through, anchoring me in a way that felt both grounding and intoxicating. The office around us seemed to fade. The papers, the desk, the city lights beyond the window, all of it became background noise to the simple, undeniable truth that we were crossing a line neither of us had intended to reach. I shifted slightly, turning toward her. The movement brought us even closer, our faces just inches apart. Her eyes flickered down to my mouth for the briefest second before returning to mine. That tiny glance stole the breath from my lungs. Silence stretched, fragile and heavy, and in it I felt the possibility of something more. One small step, one daring move, and everything would change. But neither of us moved. We hovered there in the charged space between restraint and surrender, waiting for the other to decide. She held my gaze for a long moment, her hand still resting on my arm. I could feel the faintest tremor in her fingers, so subtle I might have imagined it, but it told me more than words could. She wasn't as composed as she wanted me to believe. Her voice came low, quiet enough that I had to lean closer to hear. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I just need someone I can trust." The vulnerability in those words struck me harder than any confession could have. This wasn't about the files scattered across the desk or the long hours of work. This was about her, stripped down to something raw, something she rarely allowed anyone near. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence hold us, heavy but warm. Then, slowly, deliberately, I slid my hand over hers. My palm pressed lightly against the back of her hand, my thumb brushing across her knuckles with the gentlest touch I could manage. She froze for half a second, and I braced myself for her to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, her fingers shifted, curling just slightly into my palm, as though anchoring herself there. The warmth of her skin spread through me, steadying and igniting me all at once. My chest tightened, but it wasn't nerves, it was the weight of the moment, the understanding that something had shifted between us. Her eyes softened, and for the first time that night, she didn't look like my boss. She looked like a woman letting down her guard, allowing herself to be seen. "You shouldn't," she began, her voice breaking, but she didn't finish the sentence. I shook my head lightly, my thumb tracing small circles over her hand. "I'm not going anywhere. Not if you don't want me to." She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a shaky breath. When she opened them again, the hesitation was still there, but so was something else, something braver, something that wanted this as much as I did. We stayed like that, our hands joined across the desk, either of us speaking. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, of trust, of tension, of all the things we weren't saying but both felt. Finally, she rose from her chair, still holding my hand. The movement brought her closer, and suddenly she was standing beside me, the faint light from the lamp casting her features in soft gold. She looked down at me, her expression unreadable, but her fingers squeezed mine ever so gently, as if to say don't let go. I stood too, drawn by a pull I couldn't fight, and for a brief second, the world outside that office didn't exist. It was just us, her eyes searching mine, our hands intertwined, the quiet thud of my heartbeat echoing the unspoken promise in hers. Something had broken open between us, and there was no going back. We didn't let go of each other's hands, not even when the work lay forgotten on the desk. The papers no longer mattered. What mattered was the quiet understanding that had finally surfaced between us. She guided me toward the small couch by the window, her fingers still laced with mine. It wasn't the firm, commanding gesture of a boss, it was gentle, almost hesitant, as if she was afraid the moment might break if she held on too tightly. We sat side by side, the city lights spilling in behind her, outlining her profile in a soft glow. She leaned back, letting out a breath that sounded like relief, and for a moment we simply existed in silence. The office, once cold and sharp, now felt warm, softened by the closeness we had created. Her shoulder brushed against mine as she shifted, and then, without asking, she let her head rest lightly against me. The weight of it was delicate but grounding, as if she was finally allowing herself to lean on someone. I stayed perfectly still, afraid to disturb the fragile peace of the moment, but inside my chest, my heart raced with a quiet joy I couldn't hide. I turned slightly, just enough to catch the faint scent of her hair, to feel the warmth of her breath near my collar. Every detail etched itself into me, the rhythm of her breathing, the steadiness of her presence pressed against my side, the simple intimacy of being trusted in this way. "I shouldn't be doing this," she murmured softly, almost as if to herself. I lowered my voice. "Then why does it feel so right?" Her lips curved into a small, tired smile, her eyes still closed. "Because it's been a long time since I let myself feel anything at all." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't. Instead, I lifted my hand and let my fingers graze gently against hers, resting on her lap. She didn't pull away. In fact, she threaded her fingers through mine, holding on tighter than before. We sat like that for what felt like hours, though it could have been only minutes. The world outside the glass moving on, traffic lights changing, people hurrying through their own lives. None of it touched us. Not here. Not now. When she finally opened her eyes, she turned to me, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. Tonight, change something. I nodded, my throat tight but my voice steady. For me too. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer tense. It was comfortable, full, alive with a quiet promise neither of us had to speak aloud. When we finally rose to leave, we walked together, unhurried, her hand brushing against mine every few steps as though reluctant to let the night end. And as we stepped out of that office, I knew we weren't leaving the same way we had entered. Something had shifted between us, something tender, fragile, and real. Something that would not fade with the morning.